Well, it is time for our next speaker. He is waiting in the wings. Andrew A. Valdez graduated from the University of Utah Law School in 1977, and he subsequently worked as a commissioned captain in the U.S. JAG Corps and as a trial counsel with the Legal Defenders Association Felony Homicide Division. He's a former judge in the 3rd District Juvenile Court in Utah, and he is also a popular author and speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Judge Andrew Valdez.
Boy, after Frank Layden, it's almost like that Elvis saying, Elvis has left the building, but he hasn't. He's still talking. He quoted Jackie Robinson, and I'll quote Satchel Paige, don't look back, they may be gaining on you. So anyway, I want to start by thanking you folks for being here, all you folks who work with children and families, and all you parents, especially the fathers. I rarely used to see fathers in my courtroom. In fact, I was seeing more and more grandmas raising children. So if you work with children, especially you parents, of course, but others, I just really appreciate the time that you give to kids and making children feel as though they matter. Many of the kids in my courtroom were overlooked and forgotten children. And I'm going to get into the weeds a little bit today. I'm not going to talk about Churchill or anything like that. I'm going to talk about cases that I've seen in my court and some of the things we try to do to turn things around. There was a young boy who was in my court, and he was picked up at 4 in the morning. He was with some older boys, and the boys were range in age from 15 to 17, the boys that he was picked up with. The police tried to get a hold of the mother, but they couldn't get a hold of her. So they had no choice but to take the boy to detention with the other boys. The older boys were cited for possession of marijuana, consumption of alcohol, concealed weapon, knife, not a gun this time. And also in the report, the initial report, it indicated that the kids were wearing gang attire. We had a detention hearing the next day to determine, why the child was in detention and whether we should release the child. Attempts were made by the detention staff to contact the mother to be at that hearing so that we could release the child if it was safe and if there was going to be adequate parental supervision. Monitoring. The attempts to contact the mother were futile, and the mother didn't show up at the detention hearing. I was able to have the child transferred to the Christmas Box House, which is a shelter facility, instead of the detention facility, mainly because of his age and because he was charged with curfew, which is not a holdable offense, but we were holding him because we could not get a mother to court. At the next hearing, no mom appeared. Again, this was the regular arraignment hearing. And I asked the probation officer what attempts had been made to get the mom to court, and she said, we called, and there's been no response. So here this boy still sitting in living, at least temporarily, in a building. So I ordered the PO, the probation officer, to go to the house and leave a card or knock on the door and leave a note and tell the mother that if she wasn't in my court the following morning that I was going to have her arrested. And lo and behold, the next day in court she showed up. And she came with an attitude. I used to call it batitude, and that's what it was, a batitude against the boy for him getting in trouble and she having to miss work. And she had an attitude towards the court, me, because she was upset that it took 3 days for us to notify her child was incarcerated, or at least in the shelter. I asked the mother why her child was out on the streets at 4 in the morning. And her response to me was, well, what am I supposed to do? Watch this child 24 hours a day? And I said, yes, he's 11 years old. It turned out that this mother's history with the court ran deep, not only with her other children, but with her husband, who was incarcerated. The boys' other siblings had also been in the court system. There had been referrals for past issues of neglect and with them. But this was the first time this boy had ever been in court. But the history with the family ran almost 3 generations. It was intergenerational dysfunction, drugs and alcohol and domestic violence. When I asked the mom about the child's peer group, who does he hang around with? Why was he out on the street with these older boys? How was he doing in school? Was he going to school? Was he failing in school? And also asked her questions about supervision of the child. She was very vague in her answers and didn't want to disclose too much. And I basically told her I need to have answers to these questions to make sure there's adequate parental supervision, adequate monitoring, adequate rules in the home, and adequate parental involvement before I release this child to her. This mother had mentally checked out. All these questions and all these explanations as to why I was asking the question simply just went right by her. I decided that there hadn't been any indications the child was at risk or in danger, and I thought that with some family preservation services to help strengthen the parent-child relationship, help her understand why she needed to be involved in her child's life, why it was important for her to set down the rules and not allow this child to basically do what he wanted, that maybe we could start to turn things around, even though we were dealing with an intergenerational dysfunction. That she actually represented the 3rd generation, and the boy was the 4th generation. Well, we released him, and we tried to get the services into place. It took a little bit longer than we expected, but we had people in the home, number one, to monitor safety and supervision. And as has been stated by the First Lady and most of the other speakers, that, values, what is value in life? These are all learned behaviors. Responsibilities are learned behavior. Goal settings are learned behavior. Honesty is a learned behavior. Good citizenship's a learned behavior. And what I see in my court is these values, what's valuable in life to all of us, basically are lacking in my court with many, many families. So hopefully, as we start to flush out this information, we can provide the services to help these families. But really, we're playing catch-up, because as I indicated, it's intergenerational. This boy lived in a very small world, which was a world of irresponsible adults. So based on the information that I received with this child, I decided that we would probably put some more intake people into this child's life to see if we could actually teach him discipline, responsibility, honesty, and good citizenship, because it wasn't going to happen in the home environment, in a short period of time. And hopefully we could break the cycle of court involvement just with this child, focusing on this child, and bear in mind that he's one child out of maybe 125 hearings I was seeing every week. Well, what happened was that I sent the boy home, and I had a hearing scheduled for 2 weeks. In the interim, he was out on the streets again, and he was involved in a shooting where another vehicle pulled up to the vehicle he was in, again with older boys, and the boy was shot in the leg. And it hit the papers. It was on the front news. He was 11 years old, gang violence, victim 11 years old, and it was on the front pages. And of course, as a judge, my process of saying, geez, maybe I shouldn't have sent him home, maybe I should have kept him until we could make sure that the mother was complying with the treatment program that we had court ordered. But, those are some of the things we struggle with as judges. And so eventually what happened was I ended up taking the boy out of the home and put mom on a reunification plan to see if she could show to us and meet certain thresholds so that we could return the child, and the child would be safe, number one, and adequately monitored, and the mother had imposed the necessary rules and the consequences as well as involved in the child's life. Well, it never happened. The boy did never go home. He was in foster care from 11 years old to 18 years old. He lived in Hurricane, Utah, in a very good foster family. He played football. He graduated from high school. He did very, very well in a home environment where they had these processes of learning, the goal setting, the love, the give, the take, the unconditional support. He did very well in foster care, but he aged out at 18. And in between, the time that he aged out, the 7 years, he'd go home on home visits and lapse back into the negative influences in the home environment and get in more trouble. So he was also accumulating more charges and more victims. But we curbed the number of home visits and also instituted some supervision of the home visits, and he did a lot better. And when we finally cut him loose from the court, I had nothing but high expectations for this boy, and I thought this boy's going to make it. He would send me his birthday pictures, his football uniform pictures, and I went and watched him play. Driving all the way to Hurricane to watch a football game, let me tell you, that is tough duty, okay? Hurricane, right? Okay. Anyway, we thought this young boy, now young man, was going to make it, but he didn't. He ended up going to prison. And he went to prison, and he wrote me a letter when he was 19 and told me where he was at. And he talked to me about some of the things that we had talked about throughout the years and some of the mistakes he'd made in his life and some of the things that concerned him about his family, because when he got to prison, members of his family had already been there, and they in turn had caused problems within that institution, so this boy was under threat of bodily harm. There's another story about an 11-year-old boy who's on a street corner, and a very poor family, and he had to go work. He had to shine shoes and sell papers. And his whole world was 9 blocks. He'd never been to a park. And one day a businessman, during General Conference, and the only reason I mention that is because when General Conference would come around, all the paper boys would be psyched up because, the word would go out, the Mormons are coming, the Mormons are coming. And we'd get tips and we'd sell all our papers. So it was really a big time for the kids on the streets. So this man comes and says, look, he's confronted by the boy because the guy never buys a paper from him. And this man takes an interest in this boy's moxie and decides that he's going to help him. He's going to reach out. And he took this boy off the street corner, taught him how to play tennis, took him to a park for the first time, expanded a 9-block world to a world of unlimited possibilities, took him to country clubs, introduced him to educated people, people who solve problems without violence, people who didn't get jacked up on weekends, drunk on weekends and fight, and showed him a different world, a world of possibilities, and told him, these are the values you have to learn. You have to learn hard work. You have to learn discipline. You have to be responsible. And consistently reinforce those values in this child's life. And the boy went on to become, a successful young man and also an attorney and then a judge. So what happened in that case, it worked. What happened in this other boy's case, it didn't work. Even though we had that instilled in him or taught him all those learned behaviors over a course of many, many years. But even though it didn't work, there's still hope. Because the boy wrote to me as recently as a year ago and told me that he was a father. That he didn't know it when he went to prison, but apparently one of his girlfriends had had a child. And now he knew, and he told me, what I would really like to do is take everything that my foster mom and dad taught me and everything you told me, Judge, and see if I can apply it now to my child so that my child doesn't end up where I'm at today. So he still has hope. He still knows that he matters, and now he knows that he has to pay that forward to the next child. But for our involvement, who knows if that would have ever been his goal in life? I doubt it very much. usually they go to prison, and a lot of them age out of prison. They say age is the best rehabilitator, and I've seen that. I've seen old convicts walk out, and they're too broken down and old to do anything else, but survive. So I guess my point is that people make a difference. This man who took me off the streets when I was a little boy, he crossed racial lines, he crossed religious lines, he crossed socioeconomic lines just by one act of kindness. And he did more than just take me off the streets and teach me and guide me when I was a young boy trying to find my way. What he did is he made it very real for me to understand that if I went the other way, that I would severely disappoint him and disappoint my mom. I've heard this said to me many times that behind every great man is a surprise mom. I don't buy it. I think behind every successful man is a mom who expected it and put the time in to help guide that child throughout life and teach him how to be a man. So that's all I have to say. I got in the weeds a little bit, but I want to thank the First Lady and the good governor, who's a good tennis player, by the way, for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to speak to all of you folks. Thank you very much.